Florida, isn't it beautiful? I mean, really, it's why so many of us choose to live here. But as I said, things are changing, and our new normal is causing trouble for the region's wildlife. So let's dive in and find out exactly what's being done to help. The Gulf of Mexico shimmers in the sunlight as light blue waters give way to darker. Hidden underneath, another world of intricate ecosystems, intertwined and endlessly connected. A delicate balance, now interrupted by the rising tides and temperatures of climate change.
My name is Dr. Deborah Luke, and I am the Senior Vice President of Conservation at the Florida Aquarium. Florida has the third largest barrier reef in the world. That barrier reef is doing exactly what its name says. It's a barrier. So when you think of tidal flow and impacts from the ocean, it does an amazing job. If we didn't have those reefs, the impacts of the storms would be so much worse than they are already.
Coastline protection is just the start. Coral reefs serve as a nursery and feeding grounds for hundreds of thousands of different aquatic species, an ecosystem that directly impacts the world's food chain right on up to the commercial fishing industry that feeds us. Tourism, too, with NOAA valuing the reefs in southeast Florida at $8.5 billion worth of economic impact. Simply put, the ripple effect of coral loss would be devastating both in and out of the water.
Climate change is affecting reefs in a variety of different ways. The first and foremost way that we see the biggest impact is with the changing water temperatures. Corals have symbionts. It's algae that actually live in with the actual baby corals and adult corals. It's what gives the corals their color. And when the water gets warmer, those symbionts move out of the coral. That's what causes coral bleaching. So we're seeing a lot of that, not only here in Florida, but we see it around the world.
Making the conservation efforts by the Florida Aquarium more urgent than ever before, something we saw firsthand on our visit to their Apollo Beach campus.
What we're really excited about is we have our induced spawning laboratory here, where we have tanks that we put corals in, and we have artificial lighting in there, LED lighting, that's all computerized. So it matches the environmental conditions of the Florida Keys. And what we've been able to do in the last 3 years is induce the coral to spawn at the exact time it's spawning in the wild.
The coral babies are then raised in coral greenhouses, a slow but rewarding process that ends with outplanting at sea of what Dr. Luke calls more resilient corals.
If we know that coral A seems to do better in warmer waters, we can breed it with coral B and see if coral AB babies are a little bit more resilient to warmer waters. And that's really a key component. We can raise all the corals we want here, but if we put them back out there and they don't survive, why are we doing that? The key is we need to be on the forefront, cutting edge, and that's what we're doing, of looking at how to make corals more resilient and protecting them along the way.
In turn, protecting the biodiversity of an underwater ecosystem that includes yet another species being looked after on the same campus.
So a lot of the impacts that we're seeing with coral reefs due to climate change, we're seeing impacts with all different species, and sea turtles are no exception. Sea turtles migrate, and they use very strong currents that typically follow migration patterns each year. What we're seeing is, as the water warms, those currents are changing, which means the turtles change direction and move, but there may not be the prey species that they need there.
These ones in particular were cold-stunned and fighting for survival when they arrived. You all have had to rehab an unusually big number of turtles this year.
We have. We've doubled our capacity so far this year. Typically, we bring in about 30, 35 a year. We've brought in 32 already.
Some of them from as far away as New England.
What we're seeing is shifts in when it starts to get cold. We're also seeing shifts depending on where you live in the country, where some places are getting colder. It's climate change. It's not just global warming, it's climate change.
And it's impacting all of Florida's 5 species, each listed as either endangered or threatened. A status made worse by Florida's eroding shorelines, due in part to rising tides and intensifying storms.
That's where sea turtles nest. That's where they lay their eggs. If they come up each summer and there's nothing to lay eggs on, they don't lay them. It only takes a couple of years before you realize that species is now gone.
Since 2015, Florida has spent more than $329 million on beach renourishment projects statewide, more than $60 million in the fiscal year following Hurricane Irma. Honeymoon Island in Dunedin, the busiest state park, just underwent its second project since that 2015 benchmark. Officials say it wasn't even possible for sea turtles to nest on the 3,000-foot stretch that was worked on. In its latest round of funding for the issue, the state announced $100 million in the new state budget, along with an allocation of $50 million in federal stimulus dollars, all earmarked for rebuilding beaches. Here in Tampa Bay, local efforts are underway as well. But rather than renourishing what already exists, volunteers are creating brand new ecosystems.
My name is Richard Radigan. I am the oyster shell program coordinator with Tampa Bay Watch. Our mission has kind of evolved from just bringing oysters back to reducing erosion on many of the shorelines around Tampa Bay. One of our methods is creating living shorelines.
First, oyster balls made up of marine-friendly concrete are installed to break up the waves hitting the shoreline. Next, bags of oyster shells are stacked, tons and tons of the material used every spring and fall season, in the hope that oysters will attach and form a new habitat. This is an example of one of the oyster shell bags. I mean, it's pretty big. It looks heavy.
Yeah, it's not too bad. It's about 35 pounds. And these are what we deploy into the water.
So right out there, all along the shoreline.
All along the shoreline.
Finally, the last layer of each project is seagrass, completing a new carbon-friendly ecosystem.
When you establish these oyster reef balls and then the shells and then the grass, you are giving habitat to a large number of species. It's such a beneficial area and environment that if we can establish more and more of these, that only helps the water quality in Tampa Bay as a whole.
An open water estuary, the biggest in all of Florida, connected to the Gulf and all of the beauty that lies within, in need of our protection from the new normal now upon us.